So, good morning, students. We'll continue again with unit number 1 and topic number 2, which is phases of a construction project, its method of execution and agencies involved. Regarding this topic, we have already seen videos in our last class. So, today we'll go through the notes to the lecture. First one, phases of a project. A construction project entails or encompasses 5 important stages. First, number 1, initiation. Number 2, planning. Number 3, implementation and execution. 4, performance and monitoring. And 5 is closing. This is the construction life cycle. These 5 plans makes it a construction life cycle. Next, initiation. So if you are a project manager and you aren't sure where to begin, you should start by evaluating the work ahead and conduct a feasibility test. So what does the feasibility test do? It examines whether the proposed solutions align with the main objects. From a broad perspective, defines the project and writes down the possible solutions to specific needs. We do not make the decision alone. You have to consult your team, ensure that a final recommended solution is identified, and once you give the project a green light, you create a project initiation document, which is known as PID. A project initiation document is like a blueprint. It highlights the main purpose of the construction project. Next, number 2, planning. So planning is the key to the successful management of a single location or multi-location project. At this point in the construction life cycle, you and your team should define or identify the scope of the work, which develops a roadmap. So you have to identify the resources needed and the strategy of producing them. Every set goal must be SMART. SMART meaning specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. They should also be clear. Clear meaning collaborative, limited in scope, emotional, appreciable, and refinable. A plan outlining the time frames, tasks, and dependencies comes in handy at this phase. The budget should provide cost estimates for materials, labor, and equipment. Number 3, implementation or execution. This is where most of your time should be spent. A project plan has to be put into practice. Effective communication plays a huge role during execution. Ensure that the budget stipulated in the planning is followed. As you watch the progress of the project, record any variation at the initial plan. So a successful implementation stage is characterized by a well-developed team, allocation of resources, task assignments, implementation of project management plans, status meetings, updated project schedule, tracking systems in place, and modification of project plans. Next, performance and monitoring. This stage happens simultaneously with the implementation process. Performance and monitoring ensure that every item aligns with the project schedule. It is therefore a regular phase that ought to be revisited during execution. Every activity of a commercial construction process, from start to finish, should align with the project management plan. The best tools to use at this stage are the KPIs or the key performance indicators. The examples of key performance indicators or KPIs are effort and cost tracking. It determines if the budget is on track. Project performance monitors the changes and unforeseen challenges. Quality deliverables determines if certain task deliverables have been fulfilled. Project objectives determines whether the project goals and schedule are met. Last step, closing. This is the final step. So the final step is important as it offers the deliverables to the client. Review the punch list to see that all the weak areas have been accomplished. Inform your team and hand over the documents to your franchise operations. So before terminating supplier contracts, review termination provisions and give written notice. Finally, you have to conduct a study to examine the lessons learned and identify what went as planned and where things didn't go well. So this analysis can be useful for future project teams. Agencies involved. Indian government has constituted a judicial committee and also SIT. It may be worthwhile for SCFI to send recommendations to the bodies on the issue of role of various agencies. There are at least 4 groups involved in any construction project. First one, the builder. He is the financer. He must get approval of government agencies. He should be to any recommendations made by structural engineer and compromise on the safety. He should be then free from litigation caused due to negligence of others. Number two, the architect. It is required law that he must prepare plans. He should not veto if structural engineer insists on modifying sections if analysis warrants. The architect should then be free from litigation. 3. Structural engineer, the person with the responsibility for accepting the responsibility of constructing the entire structure. So he has to state the conditions. No interference from builder to compromise on the design and execution. No interference from architect to adopt undersized sections. So these are the conditions that a structural engineer should abide by. Next, method of execution. The execution phase will broadly involve the following actions. The priority or sequence is entirely dependent on the nature of the project and organizational practices and preferences, but nevertheless they are performed to enable successful project execution. Acquire, develop, and manage the team who will work on the project, execute project scope, recommend changes, bug fixes, preventive and corrective actions coming from the planning, executing, and monitoring and controlling process groups or teams, timely communication with all stakeholders, implemented, approve changes to the processes, documentation, and plans, team building exercises. In continuation, give recognition or rewards to team members and keep them motivated. Hold status review meetings to ensure project is on track and any deviations are attended to at the earliest. Use work authorization systems to allocate work. Request seller responses to your tender and outsourcing needs. Select seller for your procurement needs. So that's all for this lecture. Give your attendance in the chat box with your name and enrollment ID, and also we'll go through videos related to this lecture, a few more videos related to this lecture. Till then, thank you.
It becomes obvious that the nature of the work and the estimated cost, the time of completion, these details are important for a bidder to decide whether or not they are interested in submitting a bid for that project or not. For example, certain large contractors may not be very interested in very small jobs. Maybe the other way around, very small contractors who have not handled a large project before would not like to bid for a certain job. So this nature of job, the estimated cost and the time of completion gives an idea to the bidder whether or not they should bid for a job or not. As an assignment, I would like you to read the general conditions of contract and the special conditions of contract, which we'll probably try to share with you, but please do read them on your own, and that will give you an idea as to what is contained therein and why they are called general conditions and special conditions. So this is a home assignment which I'm leaving for you. It's more like a food for thought. Obviously, there is no answer or there's no solution to it. Possibly at some point in time in the course, we will discuss it. Now, here is an example of a notice inviting tender, except that, as you can see here, it is an e-tender notice. It's not a notice which has been published in newspapers and so on. It is for e-tendering. Now, let me read this so that we see as to how this particular example covers the kind of things that we talked about in the last slide. It says that the Executive Engineer IWD IIT Kanpur on behalf of the Board of Governors of IIT Kanpur invites online item rate tenders from empaneled contractors of IIT Kanpur for the following electrical work. So it says that who is the agency which is calling the tender? It is the Works Department of the Institute. The fact that they are doing it on behalf of the Board of Governors of IIT Kanpur is an administrative input. We don't have to really take so much of cognizance of it. It's an online item rate tender. Now, there are different types of tenders, and this is one of them. In fact, as far as this course is concerned, we will stick to this type of tenders because I would think that if we understand this model of tenders, the others are easier to follow. From empaneled contractors. Now, here is where the pre-qualification is that the contractor who bids for this project should already be an empaneled contractor. The institute, in this case IIT Kanpur, the organization, they have an exercise or they carry out an exercise periodically of empaneling contractors. And that exercise precedes this. So once the contractors have been empaneled, they are free to bid for projects as they come along. The electrical work. So there's the nature of work which is declared here, but more specifically it is given here. It says construction of rooms in open yard of environmental engineering lab, Western lab, and so on. So this is the exact location of the work, so that it makes it easier for any prospective bidder to go to the site if they need to or if they want to and see where exactly it will be located. This helps the contractors or the bidders at this stage decide what will be the nature of difficulties in executing the work at that location and so on. Whether it is accessible, how far is it from the road, how will the material be taken there, because all these things have a cost implication. It gives the estimated cost. In this case, it is 411,520 rupees and so on. Then it talks of an earnest money, which we'll talk about later. The period of completion is given here as 3 months. The last date and time for submission of the tender is given as some date and time. And period during which the EMD cost of tender document, e-tender processing fees and other documents shall be submitted is given here. So remember that this is an e-tender, which means that the tender will have to be submitted online. But the client, which in this case is IIT Kanpur, needs to have certain physical documents which have to be submitted to the institute by the regular post. And this is the deadline for those documents to be received. The time and date for opening of tender is given here. This is the date and this is the time. And it says that the e-tender document is available at this particular site. So once a bidder goes to this site, this gives us or gives the bidder all the details relating to this particular project, which is going to cost 411,520 rupees as an estimate, as prepared by the institute. This estimate is obviously not the same as what the bidder may agree to do it or not agree to do it, and so on and so forth. Moving forward, let's try to look at a few definitions. First of all, earnest money deposit. Now, while submitting a tender, the contractor has to deposit a certain amount of money, say about 2% of the estimated project cost, with the client as a guarantee for the earnestness of the bid. Just to prevent frivolous bidding, this kind of a provision is made. At the time of submitting the bid, the bidder also submits a certain amount of funds. Those funds are not cash. They could be in the form of a bank guarantee or a term deposit and so on. And that is an expression of earnestness, a seriousness in the bid. The earnest money may be forfeited by the client if the bidder wants to withdraw after the bid has been opened. Please note that the EMD can be forfeited by the client if the bidder wants to withdraw the bid after the opening. Till such time as the bids have not been opened, that even if the documents have been submitted to the client, somebody can say that, well, please do not open my bid. I want to withdraw from the tendering process. And most of the time, the EMD is not forfeited. But once the bids have been opened, then there's all likelihood that the EMD is forfeited by the client. So this is again a feature which is built into most of our contracting practices to make sure that there is no frivolous bidding. Because we must remember that in processing the bids and so on, there is a certain amount of resources which the client spends. And obviously, the client would not like to incur an expenditure on resources for processing a bid and the bidder just withdraws. So this is a kind of a penalty which will be imposed in those conditions. Now, what is a security deposit? A security deposit is deducted from running account bills. We'll talk about running account bills later on, as funds available to the client for any repair of the work during the defect liability period. Now we'll talk about this also later on, if the contractor fails to rectify the defect. See, basically what's happening is this. As the project is getting executed, the project should be able to perform the way it is designed to perform. The contractor is responsible for ensuring the quality of the project and ensuring that any defect that appears in the project during construction or during this defect liability period should be rectified by the contractor without any extra cost. In order to ensure that the contractor does it, and if the contractor does not do it, the client should be able to do it, but the cost should be recoverable from the contractor. The security deposit is the route. A part of the payment due to the contractor is recovered as security deposit and is parked with the client. Of course, the money or the security deposit is refunded to the contractor at the end of this defect liability period, and making sure that there is no defect pending to be rectified. Now, one question that comes to mind is, what is the length of this defect liability period? This is another food for thought for you to try to look at different projects. There's enough information available about projects and the different conditions on the internet, and you can find out what is the defect liability period for different projects. In a manner of speaking, this defect liability period is similar to a guarantee period. When we buy a refrigerator or a car or any other device like this or any other machine of that nature, there is a period during which we would like the manufacturer to make good any problem that arises in that machine. Now, for a construction project also, whether it's a bridge or a road or whatever it is, we would like to have a period during which the project or that particular structure is defect free, is able to perform the way it is supposed to perform. If we buy a car, it should be able to run. If we are living in a house, there should be no leakage, there should be no seepage, and so on. So now, how much should the defect liability period be is an open question, and different projects may have different liability periods. Also, a question is, when does the defect liability period start? For example, if the project starts at time t is equal to 0, it takes 3 years to complete, and then we are talking about a defect liability period. So obviously, even those parts of the structure which were built in the initial phase of the project cannot have their defect liability period starting from when they were completed. Most of the time we would say that after the project has been completed, only then the defect liability period comes into play. So these are small things which one must remember, one must be very careful, because these are all things which are likely to be the causes for any dispute that may arise with the contractors at any point in time. So moving forward, let's talk of a letter of intent and a performance guarantee. Now, at the end of the process of handling the bids that have come from the notice inviting tender, the client identifies the agency to whom the work is to be awarded. How it is done, we will take it up later, and issues what is called a letter of intent. Now, that letter of intent is essentially a formal invitation to one of the bidders that yes, we are intending to award this job to you. So till that time, the person or that agency is still a bidder. It has not become the contractor, and that's the semantics part of it. Now, what does the letter of intent contain? It invites the bidder to deposit a performance guarantee, let's say 5% of the award value. Now, please see, we are now talking about the award value. Earlier, we were talking about the estimated value. So the estimated value was prepared by the client, and the EMD was based on that estimate. Now, when we have issued the LOI, we are talking about the award value. So if the estimated cost was, let's say, 100, the EMD at 2% of this would be 2. But if the award is being given at, let's say, 105, then the performance guarantee will be 5% of 105 and not 100. So that's a small point that I would like you to take note of. The letter of intent also calls upon the bidder to mobilize, get started with their preparations and commence work. Now, since the time of the project is precisely defined in the contract, or it's given in the notice inviting tender also, the date of commencement is a very important date. Now, what should be the date of commencement? That usually is given in the letter of intent. Typically, it could be 15 days from the issue of the letter of intent, or 1 month from the issue of the letter of intent, and so on. So all these details, in fact, are part of the conditions of the contract, which the bidder already knows from the details of the document available on the website of the client. Now, this performance guarantee is obviously released after the issue of the completion certificate by the client if the performance, time, safety, and so on during the execution is found to be satisfactory. So basically what is happening is that if a job has been awarded for 105 with an estimated cost of 100, there will be a certain amount of money which will be withheld, and the payment will not be made to the tune of 105 immediately after the completion of the project. Some of it will be paid only after the completion of the defect liability period, and so on and so forth. So all these things are already known to the bidders when they submit their bids, and they make their bids keeping these kind of things in mind. Now let me talk a little bit about the evaluation of bids and identifications of a contractor. Now, the bids may be evaluated on the basis of lowest cost alone. So at the end of it, we can say that, okay, here is a project, 5 people bid for it, and depending on whosoever is the lowest bidder, we award the job to that person and issue him what is called the letter of intent. That's what you were talking about in the last slide. Having said that, though we can award the job to the person or the bidder with the lowest bid, we must make sure that the bidder is technically competent, financially sound, and so on. So this has to be ensured through an examination of technical competence, financial soundness, safety record, and so on. So all this is part of the evaluation process that goes on. Of course, we can award the job to the bidder with the lowest bid, but we must make sure that the person is technically competent, financially sound, has the right kind of a safety record, and so on. So all this has to be a part of the evaluation process. So now, either we do that on a case-to-case basis for each of the contracts that we award, or it can be done through a process of empanelment. So this empanelment exactly is the kind of thing which we referred to earlier, that the client invites people or invites bidders to submit their documents so that for a period of time, that is the validity of the empanelment, for that period, different bidders, they submit documents which establishes their competence. Now, once that is done, then we can indeed go for the lowest bid. Else, it has to be submission of appropriate documents. With each bid, the people have to submit their proofs of technical competence, financial soundness, and so on. Now, apart from the lowest cost system, we can have a system where bids are invited in 2 parts, technical and financial, which are opened separately. Now, the technical bid does not contain any financial details, and obviously that gives only information about the technical competence. It could include financial soundness and so on, everything, other than how much it is going to cost for that particular project, or how much is the money which the bidder is going to take from the client for that particular project. So once we have this so-called two-bid system, initially we carry out what is called the technical evaluation. And then, having carried out the technical evaluation, we open the financial bids. So typically, technical bids are opened first, and after a certain amount of time, then the financial bids are opened. Financial bids are usually opened for only those bidders which qualify technically. It makes no sense for us to even know what was the bid of a bidder who does not have the technical competence. So those bids are summarily returned and rejected. So only those bidders whose technical bids are found in order, their financial bids are opened. Now, in this process now, evaluation can be based on only the cost for the technically qualified bidders, or it could be based on a composite score based on evaluation of technical and financial bids. In the next class, we'll go through an example where this concept is going to be more clearly explained. But right now, it suffices to say that what I'm calling A here basically says that for all bidders who qualify technically, it's only the cost that is going to decide the winner, or it's the cost alone that's going to decide to whom the project will be awarded. Whereas in B, that is not the case, and the score on the technical competence will also have a certain weightage when we carry out the final evaluation. So this is going to become clearer once we do an example next time. So to recapitulate, what we have done today is we've gone through the notice inviting tender, whatever the details